Welcome everyone to another installment of To The Point with Greg and Grant. This is the Aerospace Defense podcast that gets to the point, stays on point, and makes a point. My name is Grant Triffo, and I'm sitting here with my colleague Greg Dermond. Greg, would you like to wish our audience salutation?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Grant. Hi, everyone. It's good to be back from traveling a little bit this week. So welcome back for another episode.
All right, enough of that. Let's get to the point. Today, our special guest has a physics degree from the University of California. He has advised the government and the aerospace and defense industry as a whole on the design, manufacture, and acquisition of space sensor technology for over 18 years. He has worked for organizations including Hughes Aircraft Company, GE, Lockheed Martin, and Vencor, holding various systems engineering positions. Please join me in welcoming Dan Lowney to the show.
Good morning, guys. Good to be here.
So, Dan, we would kind of like to start off by talking a little bit about your background. Can you tell us how you ended up entering into the aerospace and defense industry? Was there something that perhaps inspired you to go that direction in your career?
Yeah, I started at Hughes Aircraft Company right out of college. They had a placement center. My initial contact was with management, then they flew me down for a day of interviews, and I pretty much got the offer essentially that day. I started by asking, what would I do as a system engineer in aerospace? And what did they say? Oh, you'll do about the same things you did in college. And I'm thinking, well, I wanted to get out of college and get into do real things. Basically, due to the nature of the classified programs, they couldn't reveal exactly what we'd be doing.
I see.
So it took a couple of months to get tickets to basically understand what technology I'd be dealing with. It was overwhelming. It took quite a while to become a contributor. Really.
Sure.
So I joined Hughes, worked there 10 years. They build satellites, subsystems, space qualified equipment. The group, I think, was Space and Communications. Very large company. It was in the height of the Cold War, so they were hiring a lot of people. I was lucky in that way. 10 years later, I joined General Electric Aerospace, right down the road here in Valley Forge, and worked there for 24 years.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
On the campus there. Now you ask, how did I get interested in aerospace to begin with?
Yeah, we'd love to know.
I'd love to know that at a young
Physics,
age.
I didn't know anything about engineering, period, let alone this unknown thing that I'd be working on for years. But it seemed to me that with the interest in technology in general, that with a science degree, that would be the area to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know this going back to high school? Did you know this going back earlier than that? Like,
No,
you just knew I wanted to get into
not
it?
at all. Not at all. I think I followed the Apollo mission as a kid.
Okay.
I did
Yeah.
at that
Okay.
time.
That could definitely be inspiration.
Yeah.
And the odd thing is that in the 70s, 79 is when I graduated, there was a downturn in the aerospace industry. The Apollo mission was terminated.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there was an upturn around 1980 when I joined Hughes.
Gotcha.
So I had an interest in electronics, building kits, and that sort of thing as a kid, but knew nothing about aerospace.
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite a jump.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, then I came out here and worked with the system integration unit of General Electric Aerospace, which was a whole different thing. But there were a wide variety of experiences over those 34 years
Sure.
within that one industry.
Now, over those years, what would you say was kind of the most challenging aspect of all the work that you did with sensor design? I would imagine that there were some elements of sensor design that people don't truly appreciate unless they're working on it. And I was kind of curious to get your thoughts.
Right. From the beginning, once I knew what I was doing at Hughes Aircraft Company, I knew it was very high technology. The challenge was to come up to speed on many different disciplines, not just the sensor part of it, but the whole satellite business. Being a system engineer meant a little bit of everything, and some would argue a lot of nothing. But it meant that you had to learn a little bit about many disciplines: electronics, semiconductors, thermal engineering, mechanical, software, radiation effects. I could list 20. You had to interact with people in each of those disciplines. Coming out of an academic background only summer jobs, I had to interact with specialists in every one of those fields who had been in the industry for 20 years. Back in those days, people stayed with the company for 20 years, and a system may take 10, 12 years from design to operational deployment. So as a kid, I say, coming out of college and having to, there's always a need to want to contribute as soon as possible, but it's impossible in that field.
Right.
It's not as if you are an expert at code and you're going to be making deliverable code. You basically are an apprentice for quite a long time in that area. That was the main challenge. So it was intimidating, and when everyone's 10, 15, 20 years older, just that fact alone made it challenging.
Sure.
Which I think I learned to deal with that eventually.
Yeah, no, that's great. So if I could, I was going to ask this a little bit later, but I'd like to ask it now and kind of unpack what you mentioned, which is generalists versus specifics or specialists in terms of position. How do you feel about that? How did you feel about that then, and how do you feel about that going forward in terms of expertise? Because there's a debate out there whether or not to be more of a generalist in your field or a specialist.
Right,
How do you feel about
exactly. Know what you're talking about. My strategy was to become both. As a system engineer initially, I didn't have any expertise. I couldn't do deep dives into anything. Right, I knew physics, but that had nothing to do with the engineering. I wanted to become a generalist, system engineering aspect, but then, and it maybe was 10 years later that I focused on technology, not just sensor technology, but microelectronics, semiconductors, nanotechnology, things of that nature. I wanted to learn that in detail. Many people could be general, but I felt that I could be general and at the same time, and eventually evolve to the point where I would be considered a subject expert in one area. Then I would become more in demand. Okay, but that second, to become an expert, took, I think, maybe 15, 20 years, where the government would ask me to help them with a problem and help with acquisition to develop the technology needed for advanced systems. So I think that would be my recommendation, is to consider not being one, but both. That's my perspective on that.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So in terms of your career and looking at the different positions that you had and were involved with, what type of tools did you use?
I would consider training one of the most important things to evolve from a generalist to a specialist. At Hughes Aircraft, they had what they called an Advanced Technology Education Program, ETEP. They used the University of Southern California instructors in conjunction with employee instructors to teach short courses, or not just short courses, seminars. And that's where a lot of the original training I received came from. When I came to General Electric, it was a matter of finding short courses at universities throughout the country that would offer specific training in, for example, sensor technology, semiconductor physics, optics, and so forth. And I always felt that that was important as an employee to focus on specific training applicable to what you're working, right? Just like on-the-job training, obviously be applicable to the to your programs.
So was that readily available for you, the training? Or did you have to actually
Very much so at
seek
Hughes
it
Aircraft
and-
Company.
Is that right? So okay.
I would often seek sponsorship by customers. Said, look, there's
Okay.
a 5-day short course at UCLA or anywhere.
Mhm.
Would you sponsor that? And that was very effective for me.
That's a great idea.
General Electric did provide some courses on site. For example, I remember RIT came down for a week and taught topics having to do with product quality, I would say. Okay. But for the hardware courses, the universities did basically have courses tapered for people that were in the industry, in the aerospace industry, the technology in particular. I found that to be most useful. You know, a lot of these corporations no longer even have libraries. They don't have technology libraries. So you have to go outside and find a way.
Now, Dan, you have worked with a number of government organizations, supporting them through the entire program life cycle. And I was kind of curious, over your experience, what do you see as being, let's just say, two of the biggest challenges working through government programs in terms of making them successful? What are some of the challenges that you just ran into a number of times on the different programs you supported?
Number one would be the marketing. I had eventually got to the point where I had been a consultant to the government behind a firewall, where I could act on their behalf in executing acquisition. Put together a request for proposal, define an architecture or a constellation, which I believed would be beneficial to the overall mission of the government. And of course, there are many factions competing down in Washington. And my job, along with others, was to propose the architectures and argue and prove that this would be beneficial, better than other options.
Sure.
That was the challenge,
Okay.
to be able to convince people that you need to spend this large amount of money, and this is the benefit that you're going to get.
Mhm.
There are a whole lot of other experts out there that want their idea. The funny thing is that if something isn't your own idea, often you're not going to advocate that, right?
That's
That was
true.
the challenge. And at General Electric, the unit that I worked for, system integration, they had competitors out there that were just trying to take our business.
Mhm.
Okay, but we would overcome that by many, many years of successfully fielded systems.
You have
I
that
worked
track
many
record.
small programs, technology programs, as well as the larger programs.
Uh-huh.
With the smaller programs, it was marketing in a way, but on a smaller scale, with entities or individuals that knew me. And so I had more success with that because I didn't have to deal with bureaucrats. And
Right, you have the credibility on your side, and yeah.
you asked for two. Here's another one.
All right.
Learning the technology, again, to be able to show that you had credibility. When you had to deal with people other than your immediate customers, the people would say, well, why should I believe you?
Right.
Yeah.
You're now not actually doing what you're saying ought to be done by, say, a government lab, a contractor, a university lab. How do we know we're going to get the benefit? So overcoming that credibility issue was always a challenge. It seemed like working with the government, there's a revolving cast of characters, and you always have to reprove yourself. So, well, look, I've done this before. They said, well, we don't know you.
Right.
And so I've worked with hundreds of individuals. It made it rewarding to win over people, okay, and then get what we wanted.
So what would you say was maybe the key success factor for doing that?
After you had a number of successes, and you could remind them, look, this is my resume. These are the things that you had me do in the past, maybe not you personally, but your organization. These are the successes. And I would give many briefings, showing, look, we did this on this other program, and there it is. It's actually an operation. So as you build up a resume of successes, and it's
previous
personally
use
and the
cases
organization,
that you have proven to be
right?
successful.
That I can cite and show.
Makes sense.
It's often humorous to me that you're working with the government for 24 years, the same departments, right? But it's a new cast of characters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I would often be told to go down and give a briefing on what successes have we had in designing and developing technology with a whole host of contractors and have been inserted successfully. They don't know because there's no organization memory. So the idea was to remind them with very specific cases where technology is beneficial and in use.
Okay, so that wraps up part one of our conversation with Dan Lowney, where he talks about the industry as a whole, his career, and the biggest challenges as it relates to the programs he was working on, including the marketing aspects of the programs and establishing the credibility and trust, and also selling his ideas and concepts. So please join us for part two coming up of our podcast with Dan, where he'll provide advice and insights to those moving into the industry. Please join us.
The views expressed in this podcast are our own and not those of the companies we work for currently or previously, or of any person or organization affiliated or doing business with those companies.